Hello. So, the debate between Craig and the physicist Laurence Krauss. Title: What is the evidence for God? My biggest objection is that wouldn't you expect that if somebody gives evidence for something, first he would start with a definition, with describing what that something is, with a definition of that something. But Craig nowhere describes what that God is, and never gives a definition for it. What's more, what he does is when he says evidence, don't accept this word in the usual way.
Now, at one level, it seems to me indisputable that there's evidence for God.
He gives evidence for God. He says the universe had a beginning. The cause for that beginning is God. So, my evidence for God is that God created the universe. Circular, don't you think? And no definition.
It follows that the most plausible explanation of the universe is God.
In order to ease you painlessly into the content of the video, I will start with a story from my work as a freelance translator and interpreter. I usually translate from English for people from Europe, America, sometimes Australia, but it has happened that I translate for people from Africa and Asia. Some time ago, I translated for a whole month in a big plant where machines from Japan and some from Switzerland were imported. There was a team of Japanese engineers, and they didn't speak English. Their leader had a good knowledge of English, although he used sometimes weird grammar, but the problem was that his accent was atrocious. It was almost not understandable by English-speaking people from the Western world. But I was able to understand him very well because I myself am a foreigner, I have an accent, and I didn't have any problem understanding what he means, what he says. Sometimes the Japanese had to have conversations and negotiations with the Swiss people, but they couldn't understand the word he was saying. So I had to translate between the Japanese and the Swiss. In short, I was translating from English into English. I was reminded of this work of mine when I heard the opening speech by Craig in this debate. Here I have to open a bracket and say that a good translator and interpreter always tries to convey in the other language as close as possible the meaning in the mind of the speaker. But here I will translate part of the opening of Craig's speech, but that will be a free translation. Listen to 1 minute from the introduction to Craig's speech in the debate and tell me if you don't need a free translation.
Now, at one level, it seems to me indisputable that there's evidence for God. To say that there's evidence for some hypothesis is just to say that that hypothesis is more probable given certain facts than it would have been without them. That is to say, there's evidence for some hypothesis H if the probability of H is greater on the evidence and background information than on the background information alone. That is to say, the probability of H on E and B is greater than the probability of H on B alone. Now, in the case of God, if we let G stand for the hypothesis that God exists, it seems to me indisputable that God's existence is more probable given certain facts, like the origin of the universe, the complex order of the universe, the existence of objective moral values, and so forth, than it would have been without them. That is, the probability of G on E and B is greater than the probability of G on B alone.
And this is my translation. Craig says, in effect, I state that something exists, and I don't give any definition for what that something is. I give it a name, God. Moreover, I try to make you believe that it is more plausible that my something exists by giving you 5 suppositions. I use the word evidence, but not in the sense of data, information, fact, test, or experiment. What I give as facts are actually my suppositions, which are, and they are not facts for anybody even a little acquainted with modern science.
And I suspect that even most atheists would agree with that statement.
In this video, I want to point out 3 contradictions between statements by Craig himself in this video from the debate and statements from another video and a statement from this video. They are Craig's own statements, but there is contradictions between them. I will start with his statement that because he needs the universe to have a beginning in order to say that God has created the universe. That is why he welcomes the theory of the Big Bang, and he is glad that the science doesn't say that the universe has always existed. So he says that the number of events in the history of the universe can't be infinite because that will lead to a contradiction, and that is why the universe must have a beginning. That is one statement.
There are good reasons, both philosophically and scientifically, to doubt that the universe is beginningless. Philosophically, the idea of an eternal past seems absurd. Just think about it. If the universe never had a beginning, that means that the series of past events goes back to infinity, that the number of events in the past history of the universe is infinite. But mathematicians recognize that the existence of an actually infinite number of things leads to self-contradictions.
His other statement is that numbers are, and he uses a weird phrase made up of 2 words with opposite meanings, abstract objects. If numbers are abstract objects, then how many of them there are of these objects, abstract or not?
The explanation of the universe must be found in an external cause, which exists beyond time and space by a necessity of its own nature. Now, what could that be? Well, there are only 2 kinds of things that could fit that description. Either abstract objects, like numbers, or God.
Is there an object that is the greatest number? You can always add 1 and then you get a greater number. Is that an object as well, abstract or not? What about the following one? And so on. That leads to contradiction as well.
Abstract objects, like numbers.
So which is it? Are numbers an idea of a sequence in the human mind, or abstract objects? Which is it? Are they objects or not? The second contradiction I found was the following. It has more to do with philosophy. From ancient times, there were conflicting trends in philosophy in ancient times and continuing until now. One trend stated that objects exist as separate entities and they are immutable, separate, and exist.
The existence of contingent beings.
Have existence. The other one, Heraclitus, said that there are no objects, no entities, they are constantly in becoming. They are in the process of becoming.
In Newton's thinking, metaphysical time, God's time, is the foundation of becoming.
Craig says that in that video. It's an old video, but I've never heard him say that he was wrong there.
Number one, then, the existence of contingent beings.
And this video still exists very much in YouTube, so I think it's legitimate to use it. He talks about becoming, but then he talks about existence. So which is it? Becoming or existence? And the third contradiction is more encompassing, more important, more basic for Craig's argument. He welcomes the scientific theory of the Big Bang because that means that for him the universe had a beginning. I will make another video about that later. So he accepts the theory of the Big Bang.
Foundational to Einstein's approach was his denial of absolute space and his consequent redefinition of time and simultaneity so as to deny their absolute status as well. What Einstein did, in effect, was to shave away Newton's metaphysical time and space, and along with them the ether, thus leaving behind only their sensible measures, so that physical time became the only time there is, and physical space the only space there is. Since these are relativized to reference frames or inertial frames, one ends up with the relativity of simultaneity and of length. Well, what justification did Einstein have for so radical a move? How did he know that metaphysical space and time do not exist? The answer, in a word, is positivism.
But for the theory of Big Bang, you need the theory of relativity. It's at the basis of it. But because the theory of relativity does away with absolute time, absolute space, and the notion of simultaneity, they are meaningless. He can't have that if he is to say that God exists. So, in that video, I will put a link down there, he states that the theory of relativity by Einstein is wrong. He says that at the basis of it is positivism and verificationism. They are wrong, so the theory of relativity is wrong because it renders absolute time meaningless. In order to save face, at the end, he states that Laurence Krauss' relativity theory, which is different from Einstein's, is correct, but he is not right because in that theory the ether is kept. But that's not true. The advances in science have shown that the ether does not exist. So he considers the theory of the Big Bang correct. In order to have it, you need the theory of relativity, but because of absolute time, he has to consider the theory of relativity wrong. For the Big Bang theory, it has to be right, but for keeping Newton's absolute time, it is wrong. So which is it? Is it right or wrong? Make up your mind. I will continue with this series, and I won't take so much time for the next video. Bye!